So tonight is part two of a very important discussion around environment and the buildings that we're building. And this week we're focusing on technology. Now, technology means many things to many people. To some, technology is a cause of concern and anxiety because they're scared of change and everything that technology does. To others, technology is a cause of anxiety because it's moving too quickly and people can't keep up. To others, it's exciting because they've seen firsthand how it simplifies and enhances life. And to others, it's exciting because they realize the complexity of technology and what it really can be doing. So anyone that likes using their phone is in that third category of I like technology because I see how it enhances my life. Anyone that has ever gone to a tech geeks conference where they're talking about, for example, today, not today, I watched it, but it was actually in America a few days ago. The son-in-law of the president, Jared Kushner, gave a talk about the modernization of certain departments of the American government. And he was talking primarily about the Department of Defense. And he said that some of the things that they were doing and some of the technology that they were using was between 38 and 59 years old. So they're using technology, they're using floppy disks, as in floppy disk, the larger ones, because that's where certain things are at, and no government wanted to be responsible for upgrading the systems, and therefore they had to maintain. He also, this blew my mind, that there are still systems in place, 60 processes that take place every 6 months to make sure that American government technology systems are adhering to Y2K precautionary tactics. So Y2K was that the year 2000, there was a lot of fear about what would happen as the millennium would come to an end, as the century would come to an end, and what that would mean for the digital tick over of 0000. And they had all these precautions in place. The year is 2017, and these precautions are still in place, and they're logged every 6 months. And so they announce this incredible... Another thing, that there are 584 different forms for Army veterans in America, which are available for them to fill out for different things. The problem is, some large percent, like we're talking about 70, 80% of them can't be accessed because the modern computer can't actually bring up the file because the file is too outdated. So they've got forms which they need Army vets to fill in if they want certain things, but those forms are not available because they're written in code or they're written based on a technology system that has been superseded decades ago. But no one has bothered to upgrade it. So when you hear things like that, it's like, well, how does that affect me? It doesn't, but it does, because what we're talking about is back-end technology that actually makes our world operate in the way that it does. And thank God none of us maybe need to use these things. And if it's in America, trust me, it's in Australia, it's everywhere, that there is a slow, and they're doing, this was an incredible conference with leaders of IT and technological development within the private sector, meeting at the White House, and obviously I would say to bring about changes, they're going to engage in the private sector to actually modernize and synchronize different things. They have systems. If you want to make a change on certain government websites in America, it takes 5 months to make a change. We're talking about sometimes spelling mistakes on web pages because there are systems of approval in how it gets done, and it can take up to 5 months because in 1980 they passed a legislation of paperless operation, but what they didn't have was the technology to support this legislation, but they're still using that legislation and the systems that were put in place to avoid the printing of paper. Even though we're talking about 37 years of progression, they're still working on 1980 systems, and therefore it's crazy. It's crazy in an archaic way. And as things develop, it gets better. And so anyone that says, oh, I'm afraid of technology, that's okay. You can be afraid, but the world is going to keep supporting you via technology. Anyone that has had any form of surgery in the last 5 years can give thanks to massive developments in technology as it's being used by the medical and health sector. So there's a lot of good that's taking place. And often when we say we're scared of technology, what we're really saying is I'm scared of the new iPhone. I just got used to the old iPhone. Or what we're saying is some other fear of I don't like that children are spending all their time on video games. These aren't genuine fears of technology as much as fears of what maybe your relationship with technology is. But in context of our houses and the buildings, technology can play a very crucial role. Technology can play a very crucial role in making sure that the atmosphere that we live in is dirtier than it's ever been before. And technology can also play a role in making sure that the atmosphere is cleaner than it's ever been before, by raising efficiency in how we're using power, by having more refined technology so that it uses less power, and by and large that there's less of a guessing game in how we're designed, in the technology that's put in our home, and it's more tailored towards our personal needs. The question is, from a Jewish perspective, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Sometimes when you think of religion, you'll often think, technological development is not a good thing for religion. We're designed to have Shabbat. We're designed to be connected to the earth and all that. That's true, but that's also a cop-out. Technology is a product of mankind. The wisdom is part of the infinite wisdom. Mankind discovers wisdom. We discover what's called chokhmah. And we draw that from beyond us into our mind. And we have an idea. When you have an idea, what you're drawing on is something beyond you and you're bringing it in. And the advancements of technology are the result of chokhmah, which means this wisdom is out there. And if the wisdom is out there, it's neither bad nor is it good. What will make it good or bad is what we do with it. Technology, there's very little bad technology, because technology is very much in the hands of the people that operate it. So technology is parav, it's neutral. In Kabbalah, it might be referred to as klipat noga. It's neither good nor bad. It will be defined by the user and the practitioner as to whether it will be good or bad. So really, when we talk about the development of technology, we should be celebrating it, because if there's one thing technology has done, is it has made the world a smaller place. It has made the world a better place. It has also made the world a more complicated place. But if you look at some of the good, it has done that. Now, if we abuse that or don't use it correctly, that smallness is going to become stalking, cyberbullying, and all sorts of things. But at the same time, it's built connections between grandparents who live on the other side of the world with their grandchildren, speaking on a daily basis, bringing longevity, bringing happiness into places where that just wasn't available because of the tyranny of distance. So really, it's neither good or bad, it's how we're using it. In context of things like festivals and Shabbat, people often think that in Judaism, these are days of no technology, and it's actually wrong. There's no such thing as a no technology policy in Judaism. What we have is instruction of non-creative action on a Shabbat. You're not allowed to create something new, nor can you go through the processes of creating something new. And these processes of creation are described in the Torah based on the 39 methods of doing things in context of building of the temple, in context of building of the Mishkan. And so yes, it applies to plowing the field, and it applies to lighting fires. Technology is not forbidden. However, there are certain aspects about technology that may force us to refrain from actually using the technology in an active, proactive way on a Shabbat or a festival, but that does not mean that we can't be using it in a passive way. And let me give you an example of how technology made Shabbat easier. There is a simple thing called the time clock. The time clock is a very simple piece of apparatus that opens and closes circuits. And when the circuit is open, you don't have power flowing through to the appliance. And when that circuit is closed, it does. Before this, we had technology, we had electricity. And so what we had was lights burning for 25 hours straight because you can't turn the light off on Shabbat. Now, I'm sure there would have been some people that would have been said, nothing to do with the environment, they would have said, it's costing me. I've got to turn off the light. It's going to burn for 12 hours while I'm sleeping. It's a waste of power. And as a result, on a Shabbat, they may have turned off the light. Alternatively, you've got people that wouldn't have turned off the light, but they'll be like, it's a shot of Yiddish Geld. It's a waste of money that this is burning right through the night when I don't need it. And with the creation of the Shabbos clock, the invention of a time clock, we can preset when it's going to come on and off because I did it on Friday, not on Saturday. I'm not touching it. I've got nothing to do with it. And as a result, we've got an increase in oneg, pleasure and happiness, that I'm not wasting money on technology, on lights when I don't need them. And I'm also, in my little way, making a difference to the environment of not burning fuel when I don't need to. Now, this is one example of not only is it not forbidden, but it's actually enhancing the way we practice our religion and the way we practice our Shabbat. And it goes further. And Gary's going to talk more about it. And I want you not to think about of can we or can't we. In Jewish law, there is an approach of when there is a will, I want to be in it. That's the approach. You've got to be quick. When there's a will, there is a way. Sometimes you hit brick walls. But more often than not, when there is a problem in Jewish law, it is not hard to find a solution if you really want to. Technology is something that by and large you will find in Jewish law has been so heavily embraced that as things develop, at the speed in which they develop, so the rabbis come out with interesting ideas on how to apply it and how to use it. If you're actually involved in contemporary Jewish law, you will find that there is far more permission and far more creative thinking in how we use things that come out than not. So you'll say, like, what are you talking about? There's a whole movement that's against cell phones and mobile phones because it's actually a minority. It makes a lot of noise, but it's a minority opinion. Most rabbis and practitioners of Jewish law have a smartphone, and they worship their smartphones. It has access to email. Do you know? I'm a bottom rung rabbi. That means I don't have an encyclopedic memory. It means I don't know everything. Do you know how useful it is to have Google in my back pocket? To be a good rabbi is not to know the answer, it's to know how to ask a question. And when I was actually doing my smicha, when I was doing my rabbinical ordination 11 years ago, when I was studying to become a rabbi, before I got ordained as a rabbi, one of the classes that we received was how to Google. We had a whole session from a Google employee in South Africa on how to use Google, how to ask questions well. And the reason was because the rabbi in charge of this academy felt two things. Number one, it teaches you how to ask the right question. And number two, you'd be surprised how much Jewish content there is online if you know how to ask Google. And so it's not about knowing answers, it's about knowing how to look for them. And without Google, we'd still be using massive tomes of encyclopedias. I'll give you one more thing. It builds on what I just said. I had a mentor, a teacher, when I was in my teens, and he used to say, which era of Jewish history would you like to live in? And I used to always fantasize about the First Temple period, 2,500 years ago, 2,700 years ago. And he'd say, what, are you crazy? Why? I said, it was spiritual enlightenment, blah, blah, blah. He goes, yeah, are you aware there were no such thing as libraries back then? There were no books. All the books that you learn have been written in the last 2,500 years. So you have to get to now to get to all the knowledge. And he said, do you know what life would have been like before? There used to be something called Bar-Ilan. Bar-Ilan was a CD-ROM which was fully searchable of every Jewish text. That's nothing nowadays. Nowadays there are websites which you can just search everything to the word. He said, can you imagine living without Bar-Ilan? And I was like, oh my God, I wouldn't want to live without Bar-Ilan, where I can look up millions and millions and millions of pages of text in anything, searchable and printable. So he said, stop thinking that the good old days were the good old days. The best time to live is today. And he said it's because of technology. It's because of how simple so many aspects of our life is. And he said it's easier because of technology to be Jewish today than ever in Jewish history. And so tonight is about celebrating that and actually seeing how we incorporate technology into our lives and into our buildings in a productive way and not in a way that we should be afraid. And with that, I'm going to handball you to the technology and buildings extraordinaire, Gary Wertheimer.
There you go. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you to one and all for attending tonight. I appreciate it, and I hope I can inspire you with some ideas of where things are heading in terms of technologies for new buildings and for our cities in the future. So let's get this going. Beautiful. What will future buildings look like? It's a big question. Why do we need to change the current situation? So last week I made a very conscious decision to show some imagery about climate change, and I got walloped at the end for it. But I'm back with more of it because I think it's super important that we actually take a look at the world's population, current growth. We're at about 7.4 billion. Projections keep going up. Okay, the annual growth rate slows, but overall it's just exponential. So that in itself is quite scary. When you've got such a huge world population, how do you feed all those people? How do you house them all? How do you bring warmth and into their buildings? How do you keep a city functioning at that sort of scale? That's one example. Another example. These are the sorts of problems that urban designers deal with and city planners deal with on a daily basis. And you just look at China, and I personally haven't been through China, but the imagery that I've seen of just master planning whole new cities and building them up, and fair enough, people do come. That sort of scale is quite incredible. So this is a quick little clip that I want to expose you to. I saw it for the first time about 5 years ago. Koya ni squats is Japanese, means life out of balance.
Critics around the world have called it a remarkable film event, a breathtaking experience, a fusion of image and sound. Until now, you've never really seen the world
not all doom and gloom. Okay? It's not all doom and gloom. But really what that illustrates is, 7.4, 7.6 billion people, it's an enormous strain on the world's natural systems. And unless we take control of, I suppose, the way we engage with the natural world, we are completely out of whack, out of tune with it, and to the demise, the destruction of our ecosystems. So, what do we have it in hand? So, there's a lot of really amazing innovation and technology that's come to the forefront in the last 10, 20, 30 years. When we talk about robotics and automation systems, we talk about, this is a really great image which really reflects the idea of being able to engage with your buildings. The idea that you can literally go into I suppose what you might think of as an iPad and have total control of your building. That is the future. It's not a might happen, could happen, should happen. That is now. So, the days of people hand I suppose cutting pieces of metal and crafting it. Look, it's moving. It's moving so rapidly where automation systems, and I've seen it firsthand, the scale that these systems, these robotic systems can just, and the speed at which they can, I suppose, manufacture huge processes is incredible. These are prototypes, obviously, but the idea that perhaps it's robots that will be building our buildings. This is not a joke. This is real stuff. There's typically it comes out of Japan because the Japanese are quite weird, but the idea of having pets and companions that are robots, sort of like a Siri type creature where you come home and she greets you or he greets you and says, "How's your day? And would you like a cup of tea?" Little robotic dogs. That's all a reality. This is a reality as well, and this is a technology which, whilst it's still quite early, has enormous promise. You can literally, I guess there's no sound to it, but you get the idea, literally 3D print buildings. Whilst that one's still in very early sort of developmental phases, it's very much coming to the forefront. This is here. We're working on projects at the moment which are prefab construction. Effectively, you'll have huge buildings prefabricated. Some in Melbourne, but obviously scale-wise, there's a lot that come out of China. And this, I have to show you this because it's one of the most incredible clips I've seen in the last year. Effectively, prefab. I'll let the footage speak for itself. This building goes up in the blink of an eye. done and dusted. Very, very. Well, there's sometimes done in, mostly in steel, but you do get precast as well. Generally lightweight. Sorry. The ones we're involved in do. That's China, so I can't talk about China. But the idea is that the efficiencies on site are incredible. The efficiencies through the I suppose construction of buildings in a factory means that everything is measured within millimeters, and I suppose far safer for the guys building it undercover in set conditions, controlled conditions, rather than in wind and rain and all the rest. Prefab, just on that note, prefab is not like prefab of the 50s and 60s where we all go, ooh, prefab, ooh. It's evolved. The technologies are such that prefab construction can be just as good as conventional, conventional construction. I'll run through it and then we'll hit questions at the end. New patterns of local food production. This is something we're actively getting involved with a lot more. So a lot of the buildings that we're involved in designing these days will have some sort of integrated food production. So this is conventional. Obviously, that still happens, will continue to happen. But we're talking about high-rise buildings which will have either rooftop gardens. We're talking about backyards, edible landscapes, communal gardens. That's something I love. The first time I was ever exposed to it was in England. Everyone had their allotment, and it's great. It's a real sense of community. Everyone comes together on the Saturday, and they share tips, ideas, seeds, all the rest. Rooftop gardening, we've spoken about that. Something else that I will show you a little bit later on is vertical farming, which is starting to take off in a big way in Europe. Environmental awareness, One Earth. So it's just it's really fundamentally about being mindful about the way you interact and engage with the Earth. So these are some of the things that are going on. So biotechnologies, you think about biofuels is one example, or using waste streams from, say for example, land tips. What happens with that methane? Can we capture it and reuse it? Resource protection methods, innovation in renewable energies. Now that's something that is just incredible. In terms of, I spoke about last week about PV, solar PV, how we'll be using it on the rooftop here. But renewables is going gangbusters, whether it's wind turbines, whether it's panels, solar hot water, whether it's wave power, wind power, water, hydro, waste management. I don't know if any of you have seen the clips out of, I think it's Spain, where they've got a suction type system. Essentially, they'll have bins. You go and pop your rubbish into a bin, and no one comes and picks it up. It gets sucked away into an underground pipe system to a central collection point, and then off it goes. Innovative materials. I'll talk about a few innovative materials in a little bit. And achievements in information technology. How are we using information? Who used Google Maps recently and halfway through Google said, oh, there's a faster way. Well, that's Google taking your data and everyone else's data and going, okay, we actually have a build-up or traffic in this location and reroutes you. It's all happening. Right, integrated central systems and local center interaction. This is about how can we interact with our buildings? What sort of sensors and controls can we incorporate into our buildings that pick up the activities that we do and control the internal environment to suit the activities. It's all possible. It's all possible. Buildings that will effectively realise there's 15 people in here, temperature's gone up, automatically in this room will bring down the temperature either by natural ventilation or by air conditioning, depending on what the outside temperature is. Or it might just, if it is natural ventilation, might just open the windows up for us. We tried to get this into a building, got knocked back, but we tried anyway. So the idea is these sensors, they essentially, when you walk on it, it actually generates a little bit of electricity or energy. So you feed that back into the common power of the building. There is a really cool example. I've got the picture to show to you of a nightclub in Holland, which has integrated this into the floor. They're all flashy, and you jump on them, and a different light color comes up, and all the rest. Collection of water, controlling lights. Another clip that will come up later, so just keep this one in mind, is glass that will actually change color depending on the external temperature. So, future buildings. Rightio. So this is what I'm getting at. When we design buildings these days, these are some of the things that are possible. Designing a space where it's a multifunctional space, which has all the integrated gadgets, so that you can one day use it as a bedroom, the next day as might be a dining room. You might want to use it as your living room the next day. The lights will change. The conditioning requirements will change. It has the ability to interact with people using that space and alter its conditions to suit. We didn't draw these. These are by Arup, but this is kind of one of those sci-fi views into the future of what's possible. So some of the things that this is just to get the imagination flowing. You know, you see things like, so for example here, you'll have these panels which will open up depending on the temperature differences. Data feeds and sensors enabling smart environments. Bike share docks. This is actually happening already, where you bring your bike to a dock like this, you stand it up, and suddenly the thing goes down a chute and gets put away into some crevice under the building. Vertical wind turbines. They're real, they happen, they're doable. These are the sorts of things that are all happening now and into the future. Car share schemes, all powered off electric systems. Thinking about buildings as integrated, not just singular buildings, but as part of an ecosystem amongst other buildings and within a cityscape. Do we have links, pedestrian bridges across to other buildings? How do those buildings then share resources, whether it's, say for example, one major, let's say for example, a tri-generation system. Can that then feed 3, 4, 5 different buildings with electricity and hot water? This is again all possible. So materials, we've got it here, building membranes, converting carbon dioxide into oxygen. I've actually seen with my own eyes, it was phenomenal, double glazed systems with an algae filled water running through it. And the more you want to shade the building, the less air, I think it was, that you put through, which then effectively builds up more of the algae, which then darkens the material. All quite wacky ideas, but all doable. Heat recovery is standard these days, but this is heat recovery windows. So I think the idea there is that you have phase change materials capturing some of that heat and redistributing it through the space. Again, this is the idea of vertical gardens. The idea that it won't just be commercial buildings in the future. You might have levels with gardens where the occupants of that building can go out and sit in that vertical garden and, grow some strawberries. Pretty wacky idea, but I once actually put this idea forward to Carl Fender from Fender Katzelides. He looked at me like I had rocks in my head. But the idea that you could take one of these prefabricated apartments and literally grab it out the facade and bring someone else's new apartment and slot it into place. So, buildings are controlled by artificial intelligence. Again, this is happening. All these sensors exist in reality. We can have them all accessible via a C-bus or some sort of central controller, and you can literally, through your mobile phone or other device, control all these things. This is real. When you arrive at an airport these days, this is happening. They'll take a picture of your face, and it picks up all the points on your face, knows exactly who you are. So when we think about securities for synagogues and other, I suppose high sensitivity locations, these are some of the technologies that maybe they won't be in our face, so to speak, but it's very possible that we'll have these integrated at the entry points of buildings. So something we're seeing a lot more of, instead of having huge high-rise buildings, is more mixed-use developments where you'll have, it might be hotel with apartment and a little bit of commercial. They're far more, I suppose, all-encompassing. They really are, in a sense, more like a vertical community these days. So the idea is you will have these breakout spaces, these green spaces within buildings, and they'll have things like gyms and saunas and all the rest. This is something we came up with. It's really wacky, but then again, Fifth Element is my favorite movie, and Star Trek is my go-to on a Sunday morning. The idea that as you get into one of your fits of anger, not that ever happens to me, but a voice comes on your phone, and it's Morgan Freeman who says your heart rate has just increased and I could feel you tense. In his voice, of course, that Morgan Freeman. Just relax, calm down, everything's going to be okay. Our phones, we have all these wearable technologies, and more we're starting to, I suppose they're forming part of our daily routines where, who left home without their mobile phone? I can't remember the last time I did. So, the idea, and it's really a hope, I'm yet to see this one actually play out, is more sustainable transport infrastructure. The idea that you can literally walk outside and jump on either, a bicycle lane directly to your office, or some sort of effective public transport system. That one's a pipe dream. And smart lighting, heating and cooling systems. So I put this on because I'm in love with this brand, and I've actually got them in my office. So I wanted to share it with you. But before I do, I think I'll just tell you a little bit about it. It's called LIFX, and it's effectively a lighting company, but all their light fittings are Wi-Fi integrated. Not only that, because they're Wi-Fi integrated, there's the ability, and it's open source for people to go and code all these weird and wonderful combinations. You can connect it up to your security systems, you can connect it up to your alarm clock, you can connect it up to literally anything. So I'll just show you how it works. Yeah. I know this is a sales campaign, obviously, but trust me, that they do bring instant happiness. It's a fact.
And this is an affordable light bulb for the consumer?
When I bought them, they were probably about $40 a pop, which is not cheap, but it's well worth it. I've loved every second of them. So green buildings. Some people think this is a green building, and yes, it is, the color green, but green buildings is so much more than just lots of, landscape spaces and, I suppose, vegetation growing around the perimeter. It's the other way around, really. It's getting the bones of the building right. It's getting the systems in the building right. It's getting our buildings smart so that they, provide comfortable, efficient, healthy spaces for us to live and work in and gather in. So I'll just say one more thing, which is that, there's an idea that buildings can be carbon neutral, and maybe they can, but like I said last week, it's all about being the change. It's the little steps. It's composting, it's turning off your lights, being mindful about how you engage with your buildings. Do you need to turn on the air conditioner, or can you open the front door? It's the little things that we can do on a daily basis, mindfulness. Thanks all. Yeah, love questions. Don't know if I have the answers, I like questions.
I wasn't here last time, but did you mention anything like solar or anything like that? Or?
Yeah, we spoke about solar's amazing. It's an incredible technology, and the price just keeps coming down, and the price of grid electricity keeps going up. So we're reaching that point where it's an inevitable, logical solution. Right now, there is a payback. You're looking at between, we calculated about 9-10 years realistically on those systems. Yep. But I think the point, and I didn't mention this last time, and it's worth kind of actually sort of sinking my teeth into it, was that when you're building buildings for the future, you're not building them for 5 or 10 years. You're building them for 50 to 100 years. So the decisions you make now, particularly around community buildings, you hope to reap those rewards long into the future. But more importantly, it's about what you're saying about your community and your belief system, within that community and to the wider community, which is so important.
On solar, I don't fully get when it comes to power storage. People talk about that solar is not so practical for homes because people aren't home during the day, etc., etc. I'm not sure if that's right or wrong, but that's what people say. In context of the future Spiritgrow building, which gets a lot of operation during the day, does that mean that we will be a better off structure because we are using the power during the day?
Yes,
or does that not
definitely. Absolutely. So the deal is that when you provide that electricity back to the grid, you are getting, it was about 5 cents. It's going to, I think, 11 cents now in Victoria as of next month per kilowatt hour. But you're probably paying, the typical household pays about 24 cents a kilowatt hour. So you're effectively giving the energy companies cheap energy that they can then retail back to the grid. So if you're using that energy, there's really very little point in having battery systems on the assumption that you're using it.
So if you're using it, you're actually going to see
significant differences, depending on the size, obviously. But yeah, it's where it goes back to grid that it's kind of, the math doesn't really add up,
So you're saying if you use a lot of energy, it would be good if you get something like a Tesla battery or something like that? So we actually did a study in our office on battery systems, coupling of solar PV and battery systems. And it works out that when you put a battery system in, you're essentially paying roughly 32 cents a kilowatt hour
for that electricity. So, your paybacks are still around the 10-year mark. But again, like I mentioned earlier, as Tesla and some of the other big manufacturers continue to expand their operations, and as electricity prices continue to go up, there will be that tipping point where it makes far more sense. So would you get it? Would I put a Tesla system in? No way, Jose. I think it's ridiculous. Because firstly, you're spending, say, $100,000 on an electric vehicle, and then after 10 years, you've got to replace the battery. The whole floor is a big battery. That's $10,000 in itself. So, and then you've got the PV system's one thing, but you then got this big battery system in your house, which, look, I'd put a battery in if I wasn't home all day and I wanted to save and reuse that energy at night. But I just don't get the idea of electric vehicles at the moment. It don't make sense to me.
So if you've got an existing house, I know you're talking about new houses, right? You're building, but if you've got an existing house and you're getting a little bit upset with the way prices are going up in terms of power, I mean, I've been looking at solar, but there's so many different solar type panels, and then there's a few different batteries like Tesla and all that sort of thing that you can get for your house.
Yeah.
Which are about 8,000-9,000 or something like that, right? It's a bit confusing as to which way you go.
Yeah.
And would you recommend to go along that path, or bite the bullet now so you could save for the future, or?
Yep. If you see yourself being in that house for the foreseeable future, absolutely, bite the bullet and put a system in. Depending on a few things, orientation of the house, whether you got roof space facing north, that's a big one, and sizing it according to your needs.
Can I just say something there? Yeah. First thing you want to do is call up your energy provider and ask them if they can reduce the price of the tariff. I did that, and I got a substantial discount. Yes, I did. Yes, they won't discount the daily fee, the supply fee, but the tariffs they will reduce. Do you give them a call or try? Another try.
Yeah, of course.
We were talking about motor cars and batteries. Isn't it right to say that if enough people buy them, and they're produced in a more bigger number?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's right. But the question is, do you want to be one of those early adopters? That's the thing, So, yeah, when the economics make sense, I'll put up my hand. I'll be the first to buy. But if it doesn't make sense on paper, I just don't see the point. Yeah, okay, absolutely. Although having said that, lithium-ion batteries haven't really. They've got slightly more efficient, compact, and so on, but the technology hasn't really varied all that much in the last 10 years. And also just on lithium-ion, this is the worst thing about it. There's currently no recycling facilities for lithium-ion because there's no metals that are worth taking out of it. So they just get sent off to China, and God knows what happens to them. So that's the whole of life consideration that people don't think about when putting in, these sorts of systems. Where does all that go to?
I have a question about the modern buildings. Whatever we're building is glass structures, metal structures and glass. This glass is not energy efficient. It's very hot in summer, it's cold in winter, so we have to have running air conditioning non-stop, heating non-stop, and the ordinary household is, our price is going up and up and up. We're probably providing these insufficient large buildings with our finance to pay for their energy. Before it was not so many glass buildings, and we could afford our gas and electricity. These days, it's through the roof. We can't afford it.
Yeah, so there's a few things there. So glass technologies, pretty much throughout the industry these days, double glazing is the standard. And then you get double glazed low-E, which is a low-E coat. It helps to retain the heat in the building. That's become far more standard. And cost efficient as well. But you're right, getting the balance between glass and, because when I think about glass, I just see when I think about it as a thermal envelope, glass is like a hole in your building, So getting that balance between glass and the rest of your envelope right, there's a science there. So we do try and incorporate that thinking, what are the ratios of glazed area to wall area into the way we design. But look, you're right. I mean, towers in the sky are just, they're one big glass facade. Yeah. So what's more important than the material is the build quality, something that we really don't do right in Australia. We might design them correctly, fine, but then the on-site verification of what is actually going up isn't there. It's actually like a big gap in our building code. So don't worry, I'll keep a good eye on it. Yeah, but it just means that air infiltration is about 4 or 5 times that of what you'd get in Europe on their new builds. Because in Europe, when you do a building, when you finish it, you effectively you do pressure testing on the building, and you work out how many air changes per hour through air infiltration you're going to get. Here, it's out of control how leaky our buildings are.
I'd just like to put a little spanner in the works.
Sure.
I'd like to say you didn't mention anything at all about the realities of the negatives. In other words, if we carry on this trajectory, we are losing our freedoms in many, many ways. With these wonderful things, we can be stalked. We can be, I'm not on necessarily on social media, but people have suicided. We have actually lost many freedoms through this, through robots, through this, and I think there isn't enough. The legislation has not kept up whatsoever. And if we do carry on this trajectory of buildings and technology and everything, where are we? Where is the humanity? Because to me, it isn't there.
Yep, I agree. I mean, I think there's always a risk with technologies that we as a society stop integrating and connecting with one another. And that's why designers are always thinking about, people like me are always thinking about how can we design buildings where the occupants are more readily engaging. This idea of privacy screens everywhere, you don't know your neighbours, that's crazy to me. The idea of neighbourhood watch was to bring your neighbours together, you protect one another. It's like a passive surveillance. Yeah, you're right. We really need to get back to the core of what it is to be a community and a neighbourhood. So, but in terms of technologies, there's always positives and negatives. I'm a positive sort of fella. I like to think that technology can bring a lot of incredible, new tools into our lives, and for the betterment of society. There's always going to be rogues. Just don't engage with them.
We've been floating around this business a while now. If you look at the basic technology being the computer, the development of the computer, it's spurred almost the curve, the exponential growth of the population, probably more so. But the price went the other way. Is that the sort of thing happening with solar panels, where they kind of cut the price and development at this point in time?
It's a good question. Price of panels. It's still expensive, relatively. I mean, panels are still dear. You're probably looking at a basic installation of, let's say, $5,000, just depending on sort of 1.5 kilowatt up. Still a lot of money, but yeah, I guess it's the same as as we're talking about the battery systems. There's so many plants in China producing these things, but more than that, actually, the quality is improved. That's one of the big things. You had a lot of rogue players in the PV panel market X number of years ago. That's kind of shifted out. There's a lot more kind of I suppose rigorous testing and credibility around the suppliers. So it's coming down constantly, but it's still a 10-year payback is not ideal. But just on that, I think a lot of that has to do with politics and pricing of energy. There's sort of, I don't know, I'm not in politics, I don't know anything about politics, but I think that the government manipulates the price of power so that it keeps our existing systems in play. So, I don't know, hopefully that changes.
I'd like to thank Gary for coming over the last 2 weeks and sharing, giving up a night of his week. This is, as I said last week, something that we should all be thinking about and hopefully be raising at our proverbial Shabbos table. The Shabbos table is where Jewish people traditionally talk, and so whether it's actually on a Friday night or it's at some other social gathering, because, as I said last week, we all know someone who knows someone who's doing a development. And if we're talking positively about some of the things that are happening out there, and they may not be proposed by an everyday architect who's just looking to fill a bottom line and make sure there's as much of a profit as possible because that's what the person who's commissioned them has asked for. But if we're talking about it, then we create a social pressure that this is normal and everyone craves to be normal and everyone wants to be a part of the masses. So if we're talking about it, it's one more friend who's saying, by the way, in my humble opinion, being conscious about what is available out there so that we can be better not only to the environment but also better to ourselves. And in the context of this week, in using technology, then we might just be having that conversation that changes our neighbourhood. So I'd like to thank you all for coming, and look forward to the next series that we'll be holding in the future based around some of the developments that are happening at our program. Thank you.
I have one more question. Is there any plans for government to stop the rising gas and electricity prices? It will come up to a stage where people could not afford it anymore.
But that's when the renewable energy market will just make sense, and you'll get huge arrays, huge farms of solar panels. You'll get huge wind turbine, wind farms as well, onshore, offshore. That's the cutting point. That's the point where it all renewables take over. So I look forward to that day.
So thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Thank you.